Welcome everyone. My name is Alexander Asmussen. I am the Head of Creative Excellence here at Ipsos. I'm at the office today. It is fantastic. I haven't been here for a little bit actually, so it's nice to be back. I am joined today on this webinar by my two good friends and current and former colleagues, Per Vesterbæk and Adam Sheridan. Per is the head of Department of Research at the Danish Agricultural and Food Council. And Adam Sheridan is our very own head of products and innovation here at Ipsos. And as mentioned, I am the head of excellence here in Denmark. Let's get right to it. So for those of you who perhaps a year ago, pretty much to the day, attended our last webinar in Creative Excellence, you will know that creativity means business. And I will start this webinar off by showing you an ad. This is an ad for Volvo, and this is a very, very creative ad, and also one that very much creates business for the brand. So here you go.
Every morning at 4:30, you hear the cooks hop on the floor. It's hard times in the mill, my love, hard times in the mill. Every morning just at 5, gotta get up, dead or alive. It's hard times in the mill, my love, hard times in the mill. Every morning right at 6, don't that old bell make you sick? Hard times in the mill, my love, hard times in the mill. Every morning at 4:30.
A very, very effectful ad here for Volvo. And one of the things that Volvo has done with this, that culminates in this mother of her new family, almost experiencing a near-death situation, but being saved by Volvo here, very much in the center of what is going on in the ad. What they're doing is that they're trying not to conform to category standards of how you advertise a car. And this is something we at Ipsos have actually done a meta-analysis, seeing that if you are communicating in general towards the conformities of a category, so if it's telecommunication, it's all about prices and extra gigabytes. If it's a car advert, it's that stereotypical car advert where you have the ocean in the right side, the mountain in the left side, and this car is driving with the sun shining in its very shiny coating. How every single ad for cars look out there. If you actually try to not do the same conformity as everybody else, we can see across ads we have tested that you will have a 21% higher chance of actually grabbing people's attention. So there's a big attraction in kind of thinking outside the box. This is what Volvo very much has done. So the framework that we use is something that we use because we know that is what drives communication. So the first thing we look at is actually what we've just talked about. So how do you capture attention? So the way I usually describe this is kind of the bullhorn or the megaphone that we are using when we're trying to communicate to our consumers. So how loud can we speak? How clearly can we speak? And then the next one is, of course, what are we saying into this bullhorn? So are we creating some sort of branded desire when we are talking about our brand in the advert? And this we look at in the short term, and we look at it in the long term. Of course, short term is things like immediate persuasion. Long term is things like building closeness to the brand and building perceptions of performance for our brand. So this is kind of the framework that we use when we pre-test ads. And why is this important? Well, it's important because when we look at ads that score in the top third, so here we're not necessarily talking about ads that are the best 5% ever. We're just talking about the top third of tested ads on short-term impact. We have a 20% higher impact of the spending that we're using on that ad than if it's just, in brackets, just a average ad. And the same point goes if we, for some reason, find ourselves here in the bottom third. There's actually a 24% benefit in increasing that to an average ad in terms of what we get out of our subsequent spending. So you could say that if we have an ad that lies here in the middle, we have an average ad, we manage through pre-testing optimization recommendations to increase that into an ad that is in the top third. We will increase the effect of the spending by 20%. And of course, what does that mean? It means that if you have a budget of, say, 1 million kroner, the effect of that campaign will be as if you had spent 1.2 million kroner. And spoiler alert, a pre-test with Ipsos does not cost 200,000 kroner. So even if you have a budget that is just 500,000, it actually pays off to pre-test your campaigns if you can actually follow the recommendations and kind of move your ad here. The same thing goes if you, again, by odd chance, find yourself down here. Nobody thinks they're down here, but what we can observe is that a third of the ads that we test actually finds themselves down here in the bottom. If we can improve that ad up to an average ad, we will increase the effect of the spending by 24%, which is huge, of course. And the same thing if we look at the more long-term equity measures. So this is what we see, ads that score in the top third on this equity effect, so the long-term impact on the brand as we observe in pre-testing. In the subsequent 2 to 4 quarters, the attitudinal equity, which is basically the survey measure for equity, that will increase by 1% in those 2 to 4 quarters. If we are in the average, it will increase by 0.5. And why is that important? Well, it's important because the attitudinal equity is almost one-to-one correlated with market share. So basically, if you produce ads that are in the top third on this equity effect, so the long-term impact, you will actually increase your market share in the subsequent 2 to 4 quarters, other things being equal. And then this is, of course, the scary part about this. This is the isolated effect of the ad. So if we don't test, and by, again, sheer coincidence or bad luck, we have an ad that we think is better, I can guarantee you that the people that produced the ads down here didn't think that they were positioned down here. But in those cases where we are positioned down here in the bottom third, the attitudinal equity actually decreases in the subsequent 2 to 4 quarters, meaning that other things being equal, this ad isolated has actually hurt your market share. And that, of course, can happen if you have an ad that is creatively very persuasive in the long term, for instance, actually creates some good equity, but the problem is maybe that the branding is not so strong. So all these things can maybe get accredited to the wrong brand. So I have an example here of an ad, and I would like you to, when we see this ad, think about how fast you are decoding the brand. So how fast are you actually realizing which brand this is for? So let me show the ad here.
Hey boys, you want to squeeze up here with me? Or you can sit in the back.
No, we'll just get in the back. Ja, hvor heldig har man lov at være.
Kokjo, smagen er ren nydelse. En fantastisk chokolademælk. Helt uden tilsætningsstoffer.
All right, so a little bit of Danish there at the end, but I think you got the gist. So what I think is great about this ad is that the punchline in the whole story is that these two guys standing out there in the rain, they would rather sit in the back with the brand Kokyo rather than sitting up at front with smoking hot Evan Mendes. So that is, of course, a kind of a stroke of genius, that the brand in itself is the punchline in the story. You simply cannot retell this story about this ad, if I were to do that, without mentioning the brand name. And that is kind of a stroke of genius and what we call integration in the story of the brand. So something that creates strong brand linkage. Then we have another example, and I want you to do the same drill. So kind of when you see this, see how fast you can decode the brand. Let me see if I can show you this ad here.
I'm a man of a certain age. I'm in control of all aspects of my life. Look. Harder. Left. Blackjack. Checkmate. Stay. Fire!
Yes.
No.
Okay.
Okay. Come on! Pull! All day. Enough. And when you're used to being in control, you can't have it taken away. Certainly not by something like urine leakage. Tenement, discreet protection. Keep control.
All right, so I hope you got the point there. So this is an ad that lasts for almost a minute, and it is very creative. It is produced very well. So a lot of equity could actually come of this, and some persuasion too. But I personally, I haven't tested this, but I personally have my doubts that it actually goes to Tenement in the end. It could be an ad for anything. So this is, of course, very, very important. And the way that we test this can actually be done quite early in the process, and of course that has some advantages. So here you can see some examples of what we can test early on at early stages. So of course we can test finished ads, but you can actually also test moving boards or a mix of boards and actual pictures, footage that you have stolen, stock footage that you have stolen from different sites, and then created kind of a mock ad, or photomatics where we see photos that kind of are animated. And what I really like about testing at the animatic stage is that, of course, it's much cheaper. You don't have to go out and hire an expensive instructor and get the actors. You can actually just draw this out, make an animated version of the ad. And what we see across ads when we look at our big database globally, ads that are finished ads, when we look at these key performance indicators that we have looked at earlier, the short-term and long-term, when we look at those across ads, we can actually see that there aren't really significant differences between whether we are testing it as a finished ad or whether we are testing it as a rough ad. So I know that early on, Per, you had some considerations about what to test, when to test, whether you were gonna test, and you had some challenges and some things that you wanted to figure out with your communication. So maybe could you take us through that those considerations and talk a little bit about how you got to the decisions that you did.
Yes, thank you very much, Alexander, thank you for the opportunity to elaborate a little bit more on our thoughts and our campaign. And good morning, everyone. My name is Per Vesterbæk. I'm heading the research at the Danish Agricultural and Food Council, and I'll be talking a little bit about pre-testing a digital campaign for better animal welfare. And moving on to background and challenge, the Better Animal Welfare labeling scheme was developed by the government in 2017 with a wide range of partners on board. You can see to the right that there's a lot of big brands, producers and retailers on board supporting this. We at the Danish Agricultural and Food Council handle some of the communication, while other parts of the communication is handled by the government or by some of the other partners. Of course, that's a little bit challenging, securing that there's a red line in the communication. The whole background for us reviewing the whole pre-testing phase was mainly that we had a previous campaign to the one you'll be seeing today, which actually was received quite positive by the audience, but also a campaign that was fairly passive. It was too nice in a way. It was not really engaging. So that led us to some thinking about how can we actually become better. Before I share some of the thinkings, I'll just share some of the challenges with you on the next slide here. So there's no doubt about, as I'm sure all of you are aware, that we are seeing a lot of labeling schemes or marking systems on the market. Consumers have a really hard time navigating in all of these. We know that for a fact. So for us, it's also about how can we break through all the clutter and all the filters as with any campaign, but perhaps even more so when we're talking about a labeling scheme. Then there's also the thing that we are communicating several different categories in the same campaign. And that's due to political reasons and obvious reasons, because we're talking about better animal welfare, which goes across a lot of different categories. And last but not least, then the details about animal welfare can be really tricky and hard to understand as a consumer. And for most people, they don't have the time or interest deep diving more into it. So how do we build trust and trustworthiness around the labeling scheme, at the same time also giving the opportunity to learn more about the animal welfare details for those who would like to do so. So that was some of the challenges we went into. And for the overall objective with the campaign here on the next slide, it was in the beginning, most of all, to build awareness and to motivate, but it has increasingly gone more and more towards generating in-store sales. So basically, we have a twofold objective with the campaign, but we can see that the awareness on better animal welfare on the marking system is actually quite high. So it's more about also putting more values into it, and of course also generating more in-store sales. Well, I'll be showing and sharing some of the dilemmas we had before going into this process. And it's not to say that we haven't done pre-testing before, but we haven't done it like we've done it this time. So some of the dilemmas was, should we pre-test a digital campaign with a fairly low media spend? So it's a digital campaign. We're not spending a huge high amount on media. It's an okay spend level, but it's not like a big campaign with a TVC on board as well. Then there's also, do we have time for it in the creative development process? And I think most of you probably have also experienced some of the same issues or dilemmas from time to time. And then there's the thing: what if the audience and the target groups don't like it? What to do then? Do we have a plan B? How do we actually approach this in case it comes out really bad? And then there's the thing about we were trying in this case to engage and motivate a bit more in the campaign by using subtle humor in it. But how are we actually doing that, and how is it being decoded by the audience? And then there's of course also the part about our own learning curve. How do we become better overall? And I think what we went into as a team, both internally from marketing to research, but also with media agency, advertising agency, and research agency, was that, hey, nobody is perfect, but we're in this together. So we won't have any pointing fingers or blame game afterwards if it turns out bad. So those were the dilemmas and the handshake we gave to each other at the beginning of the process. So the next thing was what to do then. What was the solution? Because we weren't really sure about the creative approach in this case, whether the humor would be decoded the correct way by the audience. So we decided to opt for a quick pre-testing using animatic, which Alexander also mentioned before. And I think the overall advantage here was that we are saving production costs if the creative idea is bad. So we can actually do something about it, and we haven't spent a lot of money on production in case it turns out negatively. Then there's also the classics in pre-testing within advertising about understanding what triggers the audience. How can we improve the storyline and the use of humor? Then there's also the possibility, of course, for external benchmarks up against the market. Facial coding, understanding the neuroscience, the emotional parts, what kind of emotions do we evoke with the audience. And then, of course, last but not least, about speed, that we required an agile process on the research phase. So that was why we opted for a quick pre-testing using an animatic. So we developed an animatic, and you can see some still images here. So it is an actual film. It's about 50 seconds, as I recall, so it's quite long. And you're seeing 8 still images here. And this was a little bit of a challenge in the whole process because, first of all, we were working with an advertising agency which didn't have a lot of experience in creating an animatic. So there was a lot of help also coming from the research side towards the advertising agency, and how can we actually build a good animatic. That's not something that's easy. And also when we're talking about humor and emotions, how do we actually portray those in a way so it's decoded by the audience? We actually went from a version 1 to a version 3, and we spent a little bit more time on this and had a lot of internal discussions about, well, do we have time for this? Should we actually skip the whole pre-testing, because it will probably take a week extra developing the animatic compared to what we set out to in the beginning. But we decided that it was better to prioritize the content and the creative idea than to rush a bad idea through. So you will get the opportunity to see the final film shortly. So, but that was the thinking. So we pre-tested this, and I would say that the actual results was actually received quite positively in the pre-test of this animatic. So as you can see here, I've just brought through a few of the details from the pre-testing. So first of all, on brand level, on brand attention, we were quite average compared to the benchmarks. But when we're looking into the behavior change, the whole how persuasive are we, which is also leading to in-store sales, we were quite high, as you can see, well within the best top 1/3. So that's positive, and also leading to a high creative effect. So we were a little bit struck by surprise that they were actually this good, and we know that also from previous research that there's a lot of sympathy with better animal welfare. And of course, we also getting more positive results probably because of this than you would do with a normal branded campaign. So we set out also from the very beginning, we need to be at least above in the best half of within the benchmarks. But although the results were good, we also saw some issues with the campaign. So we were trying to be fun. There was humor in the animatic, but we were not really entertaining viewers. Actually, it was a little bit boring. And to the right, you can see also the results. So we tested a lot of different messages. And as you can see, we came out that we were actually more or less communicating, let's say, 4 to 5 messages in this campaign. That was not the idea. The idea was to communicate 1 to 2 messages. So it was more about going back. How do we actually include a more humorous approach into the final campaign? And also, how do we actually communicate fewer but better messages, basically? So that was one of the challenges. Another one was also that we were using facial coding. And apologies, I know there's a lot going on this slide, and it's a little bit hard to decode maybe. So this is some of the feelings that the animatic was evoking with the audience. And if you're looking to the right, to the left here within the black box, you can see the blue line, and the blue line is the level of confusion. So in the first 11, 12 seconds, it was really hard for the audience to figure out what was this all about. And remember, this was a digital campaign for Facebook, Instagram, and other platforms. So it's really important to engage quickly and communicate quickly as well. So we were leaving the audience fairly confused until about seconds 12, 13, and then it starts to improve. So we had to do something about it. And the thing here was also that when we surveyed people after they had seen the film, and we asked them, was it easy to understand? More or less everybody agreed with it. So in this case, facial coding was really helpful to us. It was also helpful to us when creating cut downs, and I'll come back to that a little bit later on. So this is the final hero version we ended up with. So this is the long one, and you'll see it now. And apologies, it's in Danish, but I hope you can pick up, those of you who are not able to understand Danish.
Det her pålæg, det er mærket med bedre dyrevelfærd.
Det er lyden af bedre dyrevelfærd.
Værsgo, så er der kalv og gris. Du må undskylde, vi forstyrrer, men vi har bedre dyrevelfærd på hjerte.
Det er okay.
It was the hero edition, and it is quite long. And the idea was also, because we're displaying several categories in this, to most of all create cut down versions, as you can see here on the next slide. So 10-second cut down versions. Those are the three you can see to the left here. So very quickly engaging the viewers and also taking them a little bit by surprise. If you haven't seen the campaign, it might be because you're not in the target group. It could also be because we haven't had the opportunity yet. So we're currently doing the first burst or finished with the first burst, and second burst is ongoing. And I'm just sharing a little bit of what we are seeing after we've conducted the first burst, which was a month ago about. So we basically conducted or performed better than what we expected. So the view-through rate was higher than for the previous campaign, and at the same time also the cost per view was also lower than the previous campaign. So that's really nice. We've reached about close to 1.2 million unique viewers on Facebook and Instagram, which was well above our target for the first burst. We've reached a bit more than 4.3 million in total exposure. So basically, we have prioritized more on reach and less on frequency, and that's also because we knew that the creative idea was working well and was well received also by the audience. And as you can see to the right, that's the exposure to our two target groups. So we are targeting mothers with children, and the other target group is 50 to 75-year-olds, because we can see that's a little bit more tricky getting them to buy better animal welfare products, basically. But for both of these, we're also well above the target, so that's nice. So to summarize here at the end, for those of you who are still listening, so the first thing I would like to highlight is that even smaller digital campaigns can benefit from pre-testing. It's not only for the big campaigns. And the next one is that I would also say that if you're in doubt about the quality of the creative idea, animatic pre-testing is something that can be really helpful. At least it was for us, especially if using humor, complex storyline, or other elements that can be a little bit more tricky to decode for the audience. The next one is that also, of course, accepting it's an internal learning curve, and that we work as a team, and that nobody is perfect. I think that goes for most things in work life, thankfully, but in this case, perhaps even more so. The next one is benchmarking campaign against the market really gives a much more accurate performance indication, instead of comparing to your own previous campaign or the campaigns you've done in the last 2, 3, or 5 years or so. So get a much more fair prediction of how well it's performing. Then is the facial coding can really unveil also the unsaid and the unconscious by the audience or the consumers. So, and it's a really great tool also for creating cut downs. And last but not least, I would say that remember to leave time for pre-testing in the planning process. There's a lot of stakeholders in this, and often there is already bought media time at a specific date, and the creative idea takes more time developing than anticipated, and then all of a sudden there's no time for pre-testing, and so it's really important to try and keep it in the schedule. So at least that's some of the learnings that we've had also from this process. And if I am to highlight two of these, it will be the two furthest to the right, basically about teamwork and timing. It's really crucial also for us here internally. So thank you for having the opportunity to elaborate a little bit more on this. I hope there was something interesting in it. And then I would hand over to Adam, who I know has something to say about social media and effects. So Adam, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Per, and thanks for your great presentation as well. A lot of interesting insights in there. So I'll round out the session today talking about something that advertising does quite rarely, which is gets talked about. Because in the end, while we don't need to talk about ads, it's clear that when we do talk about advertising, there can be the potential of earned media value. So an important topic for us to explore. And if we take it to the next screen, please. Firstly, before we get to advertising, let's start with people. As people, we're very social creatures. We need to talk and communicate with each other for our own emotional well-being and to actually just get things done and progress in our lives. It just appears, based on the evidence, that that isn't really featuring advertising very much. And looking on the left, when we look at Ipsos Global Trends data, we see that people are twice as likely, or more than twice as likely, to consider advertising to be annoying than a useful source of information to share with friends and colleagues. And even amongst Facebook brand page users, people that like a Facebook brand page, less than 1% of them will actually talk about that brand on any given week. So in the end, and if we take it to the next screen, please, we can see that getting people to talk about ads and brands is really quite a hard thing. And why might that be? Well, when we see ads that have been talked about, something has happened. The advertising has been processed, and more importantly, it's generated a reaction that's worth talking about. So in the end, it's difficult to actually get people to do this because of the different phases of processing and in the end reaction and putting themselves out there to give opinions to the advertising itself. So if it's difficult to do and it's rarely done, is it actually worth doing? Well, when we track social conversation volumes, it appears that is indeed the case. When we plot the volume of mentions for branded video campaigns on the vertical axis on the left with the blue dots, and plot the same campaigns in terms of volume of interactions, so likes, shares, but not necessarily comments, on the right vertical axis with the grey dots, and we cross-reference that to the potential impressions, so the potential reach of the campaign, what we can see is that those campaigns that get talked about online at higher levels have an exponential relationship with potential reach, whereas those that only have higher volumes of likes and shares have less of a relationship. So put simply, getting people talking about advertising online appears to have a stronger relationship with that potential campaign reach, and therefore suggests that getting people talking can have that earned media value for your campaign. So if it's worth doing, if there are rewards at the end of it, what can we learn and understand about the advertising that gets talked about more than the advertising that doesn't? What kind of traits do they all share? We ran a research program in Ipsos to answer that question, where we tracked the social conversation volume of 36 branded video campaigns in 2020 in our social intelligence platform Synthesio across popular social media platforms that you can see at the bottom of the screen. And we evaluated those same video ads in our creative evaluation solution, Creative Spark, where we gathered the thoughts, feelings and emotion responses from people in the target market for those ads. And with this unified data set in hand, we were able to understand the relationships between higher levels of conversation volume and the types of responses that those ads attracted. So what did we find out? Well, we identified 4 key traits that ads tend to share that get talked about online. The first is cultural impact. So having a place in popular culture, representing the cultural icons in the world around you, rather than just focusing solely on your brand or product. The second, creative bravery. Delivering a unique and at times surprising experience, a divergent experience that people haven't seen before. Thirdly, positive feelings. Delivering an experience that people feel good about having seen it. And lastly, but by no means least, creating controversy. What we observe is that having a minority of people actually hating the advertising and creating some controversy can fuel conversation volumes. And it, of course, needs to be managed carefully in that respect. Not too many people, but at the right levels, it can fuel conversation volume. And we bring these 4 traits together to enable us to deliver to our clients what we refer to as the social power index. And this is an index measure that we deliver as standard in Creative Spark to help our clients understand the potential of the creative to get talked about online and deliver that earned media value. So if we now take it to a campaign example, like we did earlier, we'd like to show you an ad. This is an ad for Nike at Dream Crazier. And we'd like you to watch this ad and think about, is this the type of ads that would get talked about online at higher levels? And if so, thinking about those 4 traits, why? So let's watch the ad now.
If we show emotion, we're called dramatic. If we want to play against men, we're nuts. And if we dream of equal opportunity, delusional. When we stand for something, we're unhinged.
It's super, it's gonna need to calm down.
When we're too good, there's something wrong with us. And if we get angry, we're hysterical, irrational, or just being crazy. But a woman running a marathon was crazy.
Officials tried to pull her off the course.
A woman boxing was crazy. A woman dunking? Crazy. Coaching an NBA team? Crazy. A woman competing in a hijab, changing her sport, landing a double cork 1080, or winning 23 Grand Slams, having a baby, and then coming back for more? Crazy, 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 and crazy. So if they want to call you crazy, fine. Show them what crazy can do.
So, having seen the ads, you may have all, or some of you may have considered, yeah, indeed, it's the type of ad that certainly has the potential to get talked about more than other ads and talks about a high conversation volume levels. And perhaps it's not surprising. It's a very abrasive, unapologetic statement about the need for gender equality in sports and indeed the wider world. But why might that be? What kind of traits did this particular ad have? And what we can see from the data is that it's the traits of having that place in popular culture, speaking to an issue a topical and incredibly important issue in the world in that unapologetic, abrasive way. And as a consequence and linked to that, there's an expectation from the people that we interviewed that some people, that a minority of people, may indeed hate this advertising. And it's a sad statement, of course, but the irony is that in attracting that controversy, in having that expectation, it fuels those conversation volumes and the potential of the creative to gain that earned media value and get the message out there. And what we can see on the next screen is indeed some verbatim comments from the sample where, on the one hand, there's that feeling of inspiration, that message of empowerment for women, but back to the expectation of controversy, this idea of divisiveness, that this topic maybe should include men, as the opinion of that particular person, and the use of words like feminist. So creating that controversy in the right way with the right expectation can in fact fuel that earned media value, fuel more potential impressions, and therefore get the message out there, which I imagine was indeed Nike's intent. Having reviewed that example and having identified those 4 key traits, where does this leave us? Well, it really, if there's one thing you take away from this segment of our session today, I think it would be this, that all of these 4 traits in the end ladder up to the same thing, which is delivering an experience worthy of being talked about. And there's a build to come that can just demonstrate that point. Because in the end, if you think about delivering that experience that is really worthy of discussion, rather than just thinking about selling your brand or product, you can gain those earned media value, as well as giving a benefit for your brand in extending the reach of your campaign. And if you'd like to understand more about what we did in this research program in a bit more detail, we published a paper on this topic, which is available on the Ipsos website. And I think at this point, Alexander, I hand it back to you.
Very good. Thank you so much, Adam, and thank you so much, Per, as well. So before we go to our little Q&A, and I'll check the questions that has come in during this session, I just want to highlight our next webinar, which is in roughly a month on May 27th. And it is on the very, very interesting topic about how to turn data, which we all are familiar with, but which we also know is not particularly interesting unless it is turned into insights. And this is what this webinar is all about. So let's have a look in the question session here. This is always exciting. So let's see. Okay, so we have a question. Actually, I think this is for you, Per. So what is the one of our attendees asked, what is the latest development within animal welfare?
I don't know if it refers to the development in the sector, or but I would say that we are seeing an increasing interest among consumers in better animal welfare, and also when we're asking consumers about it, there's a higher and higher number. It's not like it's going through the roof, but there's an increasing interest in it. On sales side, we're not seeing completely one-to-one the same increase as we're seeing in the attitudinal part of it. So, but there's definitely a growing interest, especially among the younger demographic. Whereas, as I also mentioned earlier, 50 plus is a bit more tricky. So that's what we're working with also.
So it's become a bigger thing, a bigger issue for consumers, you would say.
Yeah, we can see that the amount of consumers that have a more value-driven attitude towards food and drinks is increasing, and then it can be in different ways, and better animal welfare is one of them. So I think also we have a job to do also in securing that we don't get too many marking systems or labeling schemes out there because it's really difficult to navigate. And that's also why we're trying as a sector to go together to create these together with the government. So it makes it as easy as possible to navigate for consumers.
Makes total sense. There's another question here. I think that is for you, Adam, about if you can think outside the Nike that we just saw, if you can think of a recent campaign that has created social power and created traction. Can you think of an example that you can give?
Yes, I can. One from last year, in fact, and many of the attendees may have seen it. So it's referred to as the Burger King Moldy Whopper ad. So you can Google it and check it out if you haven't seen it. But I can just describe it because I would say it certainly follows the trait of creative bravery. Because putting your hero product of the Whopper on a screen and watching it deteriorate before your very eyes, especially for food advertising, which is supposed to be about appetizing moments, showing the food in its best light, actually showing that hero product rot on the screen to deliver that message of natural ingredients and less processed food is the pinnacle and definition, I would say, of creative bravery. And from what we saw in the conversation volumes, there was a lot of conversation and I'm sure earned media reach for Burger King for that campaign. So do check it out if you haven't seen it.
For sure. And I know you've also done a little creative corner on that campaign, so maybe people can check that out as well.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we wrote an article on it as well. So there are a few other insights we discovered about that campaign. Yeah.
Great, great. There's another question, and maybe I can help answer that about how much time that we suggest you kind of allocate to do this testing. And maybe Per, you can chime in about what goes up until we kind of go on air with the test. But from my end, from the minute we get the actual test stimuli, the animatic or the ad for testing, we can actually be in field only maybe half a day, maybe a couple of hours after we receive that. And the field work and turnaround until we can actually show the full results of the test can be as fast as down to 24 hours. And then only hours after we have finished with the field work, we can give results to the likes of you, Per. So maybe, Per, you can elaborate a little bit about kind of your the timing you set aside in terms of having the material ready and you know, preparing for the test.
Well, I would say it varies quite a bit. It's good to have a fixed research setup that can help you, so you don't have to discuss questionnaire content and all of that. I would say development of animatic can vary quite a bit when it comes to how much time it takes. It also depends on how complex it is. So I've seen anything from maybe 2 or 3 days in a very focused process to 1 week. In this case, there was also some bank holidays influencing, as I recall it, but I think maybe in work days, this was 8 to 10 work days in total, as I recall. And that was quite a long process developing the animatic, but it helped so much afterwards when also shooting the actual film that we knew what kind of scenes we wanted in there and types of actors and all of those things. So, yeah.
Great. And another question just popped in, and it does say to Alexander, but I think, Adam, you can also chime in with that, because I know you have your finger on the pulse about our, more so than anybody, about what we have up our sleeves for the coming time in terms of digital testing. So the question is how many channels and which platforms we can kind of test communication in when it comes to digital testing.
Yeah, so we certainly have options to help with that particular need. So the tool that we've been referring to in this session today, Creative Spark, we are rolling out a configuration of that as we speak that can enable you to test ads within a live context of platforms such as YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, as well as a more generic live website representing programmatic buys. So in the next few months, that will be rolled out at scale. Yeah.
Great, fantastic. And then the final question I can see we have here is about animatics and when testing animatics. And the question is, how do we make sure that when we are testing an animatic, it doesn't stand out too much and kind of becomes too obvious that this is the ad that we're in fact testing. So maybe Adam, you can put a few words on that as well.
Sure, yeah, happy to. So what we do, just to say as a general principle in Creative Spark, is we take a distracted exposure approach. So what we want to do is place the advertising into the kind of content viewing conditions that it would need to perform in the wild. So we show that ad amongst other ads, as well as movie trailers and entertainment content to fill people's heads with different content and represent those in the wild conditions. And to then, within that context, get to the answer of the question, what we do amongst the other ads that we show is that we will always show one other animatic. So if you have an animatic ad, your animatic ad isn't going to stand out more than the other ads that we show, because there will always be one other animatic ad. And in fact, the evidence proves that that's a solid approach to take because of the data that you showed earlier, Alexander, where we compare the KPIs across animatic and finished film. We see very, very little difference in the KPIs as a result.
Fantastic. And then maybe just a final question from me to you, Per. So do you have any future plans of testing any digital campaigns with yours truly?
I would say, Alexander, that we are a big believer in measurements overall. So, and I think what's probably new compared to where we were previously was that pre-testing on smaller campaigns. This is not a small campaign. It's not really fair to say it's small, but it's when there are big TVCs included, it's just a different media spend. I think everyone knows that. So in that regard, it is a smaller campaign. That so more digital campaigns, pre-testing, especially if we have a little bit more of a complex storyline, or if we're not really sure about how it would perform or be decoded. So yeah.
I look very much forward to it, Per. And
was that a good answer for you, Alexander? So
it was a great answer. Great answer. So
okay.
Thank you two very much for your time, and thank you to every single one of our attendees. I hope that this gave a good start to a great Thursday, which at least here in Denmark is the last day of the week, because tomorrow is a bank holiday. So have a really, really great afternoon, everybody, and hopefully mark the calendar on May 27th, and I'll see you there. Thank you so much.